I'm going to cover a couple slides on the sponsor. Anyway, so Proficient's the one who paid for my travel to be here, so I appreciate that. They picked up the breakfast this morning. So anyway, the Proficient, there's actually about 26 offices across the U.S. The main offices actually are Chicago, Irvine, California, which is the office I'm closest to, and Atlanta. They're the kind of the three main Microsoft offices. From a Microsoft perspective, the practice has very much been focused on the cloud. You can see this data without me having to talk about it, but they're a publicly traded company. We're always looking for good people as well, and yeah, fairly active in the community, I'd say as well. I'm associated with the modern productivity practice. Anyway, so my session today, and a little bit about myself before I even get started. I'm Joel Oleson. I've been working with the Microsoft technologies in the productivity stack for maybe 20 years in December. But yeah, I've been working with SharePoint for a long, long time. I was hired in Microsoft IT way back when, and essentially Jeff Teeper had this machine under his desk he always talks about. I helped take that data that was on his machine and move it into the data center. So that's my claim to fame, or at least one of them. Another one for you, Microsoft IT was, we also have our IT showcase things, and our GM, Dave Walsh, had this bright idea, which I think has turned out fairly well, to, hey, what if we hosted this for customers? All these companies keep saying, how are you doing it? How are you doing it? We can't get it right. How come you're getting such good availability? So we started this little project with Energizer to host their data. That project, which would later be called Office 365, which was BPOS and managed services and managed solutions, many, many iterations. But I was the architect for the SharePoint stack way back in 2005, 2006. So it's evolved a lot over time as well. I wasn't the only architect, but I was the one with the SharePoint stuff. Anyway, I am a traveler as well. Love to travel. I've been kind of addicted to travel. I'm on a quest to go to every country in the world, and I should finish next year, as long as Libya cooperates. But last month I went to Syria and spoke at the conference in Istanbul, the SharePoint Saturday in Istanbul, and yeah, was in Lebanon and Saudi.
Great man.
I just was going to give an advertisement for Joel's travel blog. I mean, I'm an armchair traveler, so I follow Joel around the world. I've been reading his travel blog since the day he started it, and he does a great job of meeting the people and really understanding the cultures of the places he goes to. And I really enjoy, Joel, your photos and your insights on what you observe on your
Thanks, I appreciate that. Travelingepic.com is my travel blog.
So I mean, you'll be going off planet when you finish.
Yeah.
I have to figure out what
I got it.
moons are next.
You'll have the first SharePoint standard. You'll be the first SharePoint Saturday speaker on Mars.
That's right. The first SharePoint Saturday on the moon, you'll see. That's right. In fact, like the club, they say, of like people who've been to every country in the world is there's more astronauts than have been to every country. Fairly exclusive group, but I'm super jazzed about that too. Anyway, enough about me. Oh, one last thing. You may also know me from the InfoPath funeral or the team's wedding that just recently happened at Ignite, which I think is a good segue. So Teams and SharePoint, I do think that there's this call to action, and Microsoft's ability to articulate it. I think there's a significant wave that's been happening. I would actually raise that siren call and say, hey, anybody who's doing SharePoint today, if you think that you can continue to do SharePoint and ignore Teams, it's to your detriment. And let me say it the other way around as well. Those who embrace Teams will have a much more fruitful future, even as a SharePoint person. And that may sound a little bit strange. And that's not just online people, I'm talking on-prem people as well. You will better understand the strategy of the SharePoint team people, the SharePoint team at Microsoft, if you also do Teams. And I think as well, like if you talk about hybrid roles, the more the SharePoint people learn and embrace Teams, the better, much better off you will be. Like you're gonna paint yourself in a corner if you don't learn Teams.
Can I put that in a slightly more straightforward way?
Yeah, one up me, please.
Learn Teams or learn to say, do you want fries with that?
Wow. Okay. I like that.
All right.
This is the home of McDonald's too, right?
Yeah, right down the road.
It used to be.
Used to be down the road. Yeah, that's true.
Further down the road.
Yeah, they're further down the road now.
All right. Yeah. So this session, I think, is a good one to kind of not just introduce Teams. I really want to help you understand that vision of what I was even just talking about. The fact that Teams and SharePoint are better together. But, and I don't really have a lot of that content, but the vision of what Teams is, if you actually understand that vision, like if that's your takeaway is like just to catch a piece of what the vision is here, that my mission accomplished. You know, I really think that collaboration, you know, at Microsoft, it used to be a SharePoint thing. Collaboration at Microsoft now is a Teams and SharePoint thing. Seriously, like it's evolved, and even as an application platform, there was a big wake-up call for me when I was at on Microsoft campus not long ago, sitting in a session, and up in front is Mike Amerland. Some of you may know Mike. He's run basically the dev side of the SharePoint stuff for a long time. And here he is up front talking about Teams as an application platform, talking about extensibility. Like there's even inside, you know, behind the curtain at Microsoft, there's been a lot of exchange, a lot of evolution of what Teams has been focused on. So this agenda today, essentially we want to kind of go through teamwork and what that's about, this vision, which I think is the most important thing, is like you can just wrap your head around this vision. A little bit on change management, and basically one of the things that's going to be most fascinating, I think, to people, especially IT folks, Teams deployment is different than any other deployment you've ever done. This is not turning the lights on. Even other Office 365 applications, a lot of it's, I just got to train my users and I activate the licenses. That's not the case here with Teams. And I think once you see the vision, you'll understand what I'm talking about. There's this whole adoption change management thing that if you don't wrap your head around it, your role and the success of Teams will suffer as a result. There's some templates that Microsoft's been working on, some app templates. I really don't like making the parallel between the Fab 40, but these new application templates, definitely worthwhile. Those of you who are developers or people who are looking to build solutions on Teams, some really, really great work here. Then I want to talk about dev a little bit. You know, I talk about Teams as a platform. I want to talk a little about some information architecture and make sure that you get all the resources. And this deck will be published as well. So the first thing I'm going to say is you do need to kind of build a business case for what we're talking about here and kind of understand what got us here, what are the current challenges in the business. And This one about context switching, I think, is one of the most important things for us to understand, especially as we talk about it as an application platform. Essentially, our brains and the way they work, we really don't handle interruption very well. And this time we live, it's all about interruption. Everything's trying to interrupt. I mean, you look at your phone and the notifications. Basically, you're waiting for one little notification, and as soon as you look at your phone, distraction goes way, way up. And we live with that distraction. You know, as somebody with ADD, and I will admit, I get so distracted. You know, I click on a link, now I'm on some other interface, I get lost. 15 minutes, half hour later, oh yeah, I was trying to do my expenses, you know? It's incredible just how easily we get distracted and how context switching is such a big problem. So when we talk about the vision for teams, it's about reducing this context switching problem. And it ultimately means focus. The goal is focus. If we can just stay focused, we can actually accomplish tons more. It means a lot from a productivity perspective. And the other thing here is we all hear about automation and how business process automation is really the future. And when you start talking about there was when I was working in the Nintex world, or with them as a partner, they had this great study that was done by, I'm sorry that I don't have the reference for you, but it was like $1 trillion of US business that's lost based on us doing routine tasks that can be automated with current technology, just with the technology we have now. And that was 3 to 5 years ago. Like, our ability to automate is going to continue to add more and more productivity. So this vision of business process automation, and those of you who work in the Power Platform, that's going to continue to create jobs and add jobs. No one should be worried about jobs if you're living in this space of automation. There's going to be more and more and more. And when you start talking about that, and you say Flow and Power Apps and Power BI and virtual agents and all these things, you'll notice, well, what's the UI? And you might say, well, the UI is SharePoint, or the UI is Teams. Ultimately, when Microsoft continues to lay out that before you, it's really a Teams experience, even if you build the UI in SharePoint. In fact, Bob German did a blog post a couple weeks ago on building Teams apps in SharePoint. Great article, highly recommended. I'm a big fan of visuals. So this particular visual came from one from Ephraim Fried from a few years ago. I really liked it, and I spun it around backwards. So let me first give you his quote. The future of digital working will offer tools that tie together communications, content, tasks, applications, collaborative work, and other elements together around work streams. Sounds like a great definition of Teams to me. When you start saying what's the default behavior here? And these various work streams, you could say, are various inputs. There's our inbox, our phone, our email, and the various ways we receive data and inputs. The projects, updates, activities, tasks, requests, service requests, change requests. Depending on your role in the business, there's all the things that you get bombarded with. Well, wouldn't it be great if we had something that would actually organize those into work streams? Work streams may be teams or projects or customers, channels, if you will, that then plug in, and on the back end, instead of jumping from one application to the next, we have these work streams where we can handle right in that channel our ability to process applications, whether it's approval routing or actually fulfilling the requests without even having to leave the UI. I think the information workers today, and I was even looking on the internet to see if I could find some interesting statistics. Couldn't find anything. But a decade or two ago, it was, there's people who live in Outlook and people who live in the browser. And pretty much those are the two worlds. Well, I really do think this idea of the digital workspace, workplace, is this next evolution. How can we actually get the productivity tools that our users use into an experience where they never even have to leave the tool? And so whether that is in the browser or whether that's in the rich client, that's really the dream, such that we can actually receive the work, process it, and continue on. And whether that's being on calls and meetings and all the things that are happening, our ability to kind of stay up to date and be aware of what's happening, we're all plugged into kind of this common user experience. So a little bit more. In fact, there's an article from Forrester, highly recommended, April 2019, Total Economic Impact Report on Microsoft Teams. This article, a couple of quotes out of it, 80% of leaders reported the accessibility features in Teams made their organization more productive. 83% of leaders reported that Teams helped organize, improve customer experiences. Now, what's fascinating is customer experience is something that a very common goal for organizations. Really stellar stuff coming out of that report. Now, our most valuable asset is time. So there's a number of things that come out of the same report that I was referring to. So when you're starting to kind of build your business case, or maybe you've already got Teams and you're trying to build some success metrics, I think these are some really good examples of things that if you can start to capture, can we see ways that people can be reducing meetings or saving time, working outside the organization, reducing times in meetings, reducing saving time from improved collaboration, information sharing as well. So I have had the best experience in terms of working on multi-user editing. Teams does a really good job. In fact, Office has really evolved in that space now, where multi-user working on a document is so much better than it used to be. And Teams definitely helps facilitate the sharing and the collaboration of that as well. So I want to talk a little about this vision. And before I dive into the vision itself, everybody in here is and can be a leader. And a lot of you, when you think of leaders in your organization, you think, oh, well, that's our CIO or the CEO. But ultimately, these leaders can be anywhere inside the organization, top to bottom. So let's think about that for a second. I want to read this quote from Simon Sinek. Leadership is about pointing in the direction, articulating a vision of the world that does not yet exist, then asking help from others to ensure that vision happens. And I think that that's so true. And you may not realize it, but you're very likely a leader in your organization already. But being able to paint that vision is really important, and obviously is a big game changer. So here's one of the first visions I want to give you around Teams, and this is actually a Microsoft slide. Vision of the Teams platform. Basically, the idea is there's this hub. The hub is this idea of providing a single hub to reduce context switching and make decisions faster. I think that's a great vision for one of the, if Teams is three things, it's the hub, it's these workflows and automation, and it's your ability to connect to line of business data. I think that's pretty good vision.
Hey, Joel.
Yeah.
You guys talk about SharePoint, Office, all this stuff tied together.
like one lane over now in the Dynamics world, but I've never heard anything about any connection to Dynamics.
Oh, there's tons of connections.
Tons?
Tons.
Tons,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. Huge, huge. Yeah.
Most often the connections to Dynamics manifest themselves in Teams as apps within
Yep.
Teams, right? Because they're usually very business process or workflow specific. Yeah. So, like for ourselves and our sales organization, we can access our CRM system as an app within the Teams user interface.
Okay.
But you could think of the same thing like for a call center or maybe an inventory tracking management application that for the back end running in Dynamics, and then the UI is an app that's in Teams.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And you should look, there's actually some right out of the box
Okay.
apps as well. So I recently built this infographic, and this is the first part of it. But have you heard these analogies around icebergs, where there's what you see above the water, but there's something below the water, and what's below the water you can't see, and you have no idea how large it is. So what's interesting about Skype is we've been with Skype long enough, we kind of know what the edges are. It's very much calling, chats, meetings. It's a very UC focused app. And a lot of people who they talk about Skype for Business, yes, it's going away July 2021 next year. So a lot of people are heightened about, oh, I need to move to Teams. Well, Teams does have calling, chats, and meetings, but it also has some hidden rich functionality that a lot of people don't even realize in this whole collaboration space. We're talking storage. Let's just talk about storage for a second. How many people have connected their storage to anything other than SharePoint and OneDrive? Yeah? What did you guys connect it to?
I'm actually syncing Teams file storage down, so it's taking SharePoint.
Okay. Yeah, so there's Citrix, there's Box, there's Dropbox,
I see.
G Drive. Like you can basically connect your team to all sorts of different, all the most common places people put their storage. So as you're collaborating with your teams, you can even have multiple repositories of the files. And it actually updates the UI even. So when you're automatically uploading, it can be stored in the various repositories your teams use. This app space is really quite large. We're going to dive into the apps a little bit more. These connectors as well, when you start talking about Power Apps and Power Automate and your ability to connect hundreds of different systems, but even your ability to build additional connectors and APIs, webhooks. We'll get more into the dev side as well later on. But the whole collaboration with channels, very, very rich. It wasn't that long ago people would say, oh, well, Slack's nailed it. Slack's doing really well. Teams, since Ignite, there was that basically an announcement. Hey, we recently beat Slack. We have 13 million daily users. 3 months later, they had already increased what Slack had the previous year. In 4 months, they had already grown by what Slack had the previous year. So Teams is just taken off. It's going crazy. I think what's important is that we actually have the right vision so that it lands well. Because a really interesting statistic for you is users, 80% of them will choose the tool that they prefer for communication. So it's a real challenge for IT when you're trying to get the organization to use a common tool. So yeah, there's absolutely a battle that's going on inside the organization. Just like teams will choose whether they're going to use Box or Dropbox, and Teams and SharePoint or OneDrive. What I like about the storage side of Teams is by default, it does the right thing. If I'm sharing a file with another user, it's going to put it in my OneDrive and share it. If I'm sharing it on a channel, with the team, it's going to go in the team folder under a SharePoint site that was provisioned as part of the team. It's really, really good stuff. But the message here as well is like, don't underestimate as you're deploying teams what it really is. Because I think even you have these people who've been managing the UC side of Skype, the calling, meetings, minutes, the calling plans, and the conference rooms. They may be Cisco people, or they may be Skype people, whatever. When they start approaching Teams, they're approaching it from that perspective. They're thinking about calling plans, meeting minutes, and or the conference rooms and the infrastructure. And then you've got these other people who may be coming from the SharePoint world who are approaching Teams, and they're looking at it from a perspective of, oh, this is the new way, this is the new front end for SharePoint. Teams is this very clever, slick UI where we can have both real-time collaboration and near real-time collaboration happening at the same time in the same environment. And communication and collaboration have just come together in this really, really powerful way. And so they may be focused on this collaboration side of it. But really, these two worlds need to come together. And what's fascinating about this is people bring their past, they bring their previous perspective into this world. And so if they're a voice expert and they're approaching Teams, they're going to have a very, very different approach. They're not going to want to focus on adoption change management. They're looking at making sure the infrastructure works and that the calling plans, they're looking at health and voice quality and so on. But if you've got the SharePoint team who's looking at Teams, they're focused on information architecture and governance and things like that related to Teams. So it's really fascinating how much this is going to evolve even within our community. The SharePoint conference is coming up. Those of us who've been working with SharePoint for a long, long time, you may be surprised or not surprised that it actually took an invitation to bring the Teams team to the SharePoint conference. Like that's happening now. The Teams is at, the Teams team actually has their own conference, Comsverse, but they're also now coming to SPC. And I think what you're going to see is a continued convergence of these worlds. And I'm definitely anxious to kind of see how this continues to evolve. So I think that as well, when you start talking about Teams as a perspective of an app platform, there's kind of like building personas. And often when we talk about personas, we're talking about individual users. But really, in relation to Teams, we need to be thinking about team personas. Let's draw up on the whiteboard, Teams in the middle, and then start talking about, okay, as a team, what are the file sharing applications we use? What are the communication and collaboration and task management, and what are the things that our team uses to kind of get our work done? Do we have our projects in Trello? Do we have our projects and tasks in Outlook? And one of the great things here is actually Teams has really taken on this task management thing to the nth degree. There's some people who just really, really love To Do, and To Do has just taken off. And the integration now with To Do and Teams, and this new task management, and even the new project apps, and bringing this whole, if I have tasks in Outlook, these worlds are all converging into this kind of private space, even on Teams, called tasks. So inside of tasks, you can see boards of the information and things that you've got going on as people work in Planner, and as you manage your personal tasks in Outlook and so on. It kind of brings it into a common user interface. And when I started looking at all the things that may be going on inside of an organization as it relates to digital transformation, things like IoT and machine learning and chat bots and productivity, intranets, business process management, a lot of the just huge projects inside of an organization. Teams really can and should be at the center of all that. It can be this hub where we're managing the IoT dashboards and building our flows and connecting them up where it's the user interface. It could be where we present up our chatbot. Doesn't necessarily mean we can't plug that chatbot into the UI in SharePoint somewhere as well. But it's even with, say, Project Cortex, something that Microsoft announced at Ignite. When you start talking about where Microsoft's going in this next generation platform of AI and machine learning, that system of gathering all the knowledge across both internal and data that's in the cloud, bringing it into a common interface. There's the search experience. There's the automation side of it. And being able to access that knowledge. And Teams is this great platform to kind of create that common user experience. I could spend another hour just on these things. That's not my intention. But I do want to just point out, when you're deploying Teams, some of the most critical things are your governance plan, having a good sponsor, executive sponsor, this clear vision and a roadmap for how you're actually rolling it out. And that roadmap actually is a good way to I've heard many customers say, Teams kind of took off and before we were ready. So what do we do now? And this idea of, okay, well, maybe we're not going to start with the calling plans. We're actually going to start with, let's start with, maybe start with collaboration and chat and that kind of thing, and then slowly work into more of the features. Maybe you want to go back to those team personas and really build a pilot, even though it's already been deployed. Let's do it. Let's pick some team or department and start a pilot, even though the Teams has been going on. It's interesting because you think, oh, well, it's an application, but it's an application, but it's also a platform. And especially if you want to realize that vision of reduced context switching. Well, how do we actually? What should we be doing for HR? What should we be doing for finance? What should we be doing for these different departments? And your ability, I think, inside the organization to be able to set out that vision will work a ton better if you can actually start with one department and show what's possible. That way the other ones can look at it and say, oh, I get it. This isn't just about how many users are chatting with the platform. That's not what adoption and success looks like. It's not just about people are using it for their soft phone. That might be a great, success story for the UC team, but ultimately realizing the platform is really being able to kind of measuring business outcomes. Like this platform has so many capabilities, and if you look at the vision for where the Teams team is taking it, it's pretty incredible. I'm going to talk a little bit more about change management and these champion programs. Microsoft has some great collateral, but they've also got a great case study for how they used it internally and how they deployed it internally, what they were focused on or how they rolled it out. In fact, one of their success stories was around their strategy for training. They had this thing called the art of teamwork, where this is the one thing we want people to consume and use. It's going to be tough for us to touch every single user, but let's start small. We'll do some brown bags, and then we're going to track those users who actually attended those art of teamwork, who kind of understand what this is about. They learn the tools, they learn some tips and tricks, but it's not a full day thing. It's a bite-sized chunk. And then we'll track their adoption against the people who haven't had the training. And they definitely felt the benefits of doing that. But as well, out of those brown bags, they have these people who are just anxious and hungry. They want more, and they want to be part of this community, this champions program, where people even have a badge, where people can, hey, because I'm a team's champion, you can ask me about the platform. I can help you figure out how to some tips and tricks and how to connect and improve your meetings experience. And I would say kind of not stopping there. There is this whole Teams as an application platform where the business doesn't even know what to ask you for. They don't know what to even, Teams is an application platform or a development platform. What are you talking about? Isn't just this the new version of Skype? Skype was not a development platform. You know, that'd be kind of some really kind of funky apps to think about from that perspective. But there's more to it, and I think the more that you learn, the more capabilities you understand. So I'm actually gonna jump out a second and show you a quick video. Do we have any questions? I've been kind of just cruising along here.
None online so far.
Okay.
I have a
Yeah,
question
comment.
about how the corporate intranet experience fits into Teams, because I mean, there's essentially two use cases for SharePoint. There's collaboration, there's team collaboration sites which fit into Teams channels, and there's corporate communication and the intranet and where Project Cortex gets to play.
Yes.
How does the intranet experience fit into the Teams? I mean, you wouldn't want to add the intranet as a channel or as a tab in every channel.
Right.
Is there an app? Can you set up an app for it, or how do you envision that fitting in?
I absolutely see this fitting in. Let me start with that. And I think that, some interesting politics, I think, inside of Microsoft even, where it's like different apps have kind of carved out certain spaces. What I haven't seen yet is the Teams team focus on the enterprise hub, right? That big place where everybody goes. That being said, because the number right now is around 5,000, and often when Microsoft releases things and focuses on things in a huge, huge way, they want to make sure that the Fortune 500 have a really good place to live, right? And that vision can be fully realized. Already inside of Teams is something called the org-wide teams. So you can create a team and say, this is an org-wide team, which means everybody in the organization can get to it. So there's some questions about scalability, but let's put those aside for just a second and say, what could we do with a team that is accessible by everybody inside the organization?
Call it Yammer.
Well, and I think that there already is that too, right? They've already said on the roadmap there's an icon for the new Yammer right on there. And you talk about integration with Cortex, any kind of Q&A can get pushed right into Cortex. Like we've already seen those demos. So what is that org-wide thing? How do we integrate? What are the most, in fact, we could even say, what are the most important things on an intranet? News. All right, well, we already got the news from SharePoint plugged right into Teams. So check there, right? Well, what's the next thing? Tools and UI, links. Search. Search is a big one, right? So you can search right in the bar. The search experience, I would probably give it a C right now. It's not great.
Improving.
It's improving, and I would say that it's actually getting better. So when Microsoft Search launches, that search bar is probably going to be one of the most powerful search experiences. So we know that that's being something they're investing in anyway. And I've seen some third-party integration tools like the BA Insight Teams tool that basically will launch a week after the Microsoft Search is officially launched. really, really slick. So your ability to basically search across all the repositories you've got and being able to get it in Teams, already done. Like the software's done, they're just waiting for Microsoft to say it's released. What else on an intranet do we care about?
We usually have like departmental home sites. Or
Yeah,
websites.
the hubs, right?
Hubs.
So we got in SharePoint, we have this whole system of hubs. Well, any page in those hubs that we want to expose, we can pull it right into Teams. And in fact, let's just say, for example, we wanted to have an HR team that everybody can get into. So it's an org-wide HR application, essentially. What do we do in there? Well, you're going to see an example later on of the Q&A bot and how they kind of hook that up to the HR system, the time off and leave requests, and as well, ADP is already one of the applications that's right out of the box that you can add in. The DocuSign integrations, like if there's any new employee orientation. In fact, I think one of the greatest HR spaces, HR related spaces, is to have a team that's for new employees. So such that there's a place where you can go and ask questions, you can search, you can that new Yammer Q&A, I'll be part of it, where they can see any questions and related to information. But I don't think we have to say right now the intranet is dead, but I do think that we should say any work we do on any web space should be Teams compatible. We should be building stuff with the SharePoint framework and making sure that they plug in as Teams parts, essentially.
I still struggle with that from the user experience perspective of, I mean, there's my teamwork, and then there's stuff I need to do to find out, like, if I want to find out what our vacation day is.
Organizational references.
So, but even that scenario, I've got slides on that one. So hold on to that one. We'll talk about that.
In my head, I keep imagining it as a Teams app that is one tab that goes to the intranet home page.
Well, see, I would hope that I would say that's old school thinking.
Right.
And I don't mean to like but it's like this.
Fair.
Actually, I ought to be able to say, what's my time off balance, and get a nice little chart. And then I can say, what is the next company holiday? All right, I want the next 2 days after that. You know, like being able to basically interact with the bot or interact with the cards, and calendar picker, choosing my dates. I shouldn't have to go into Oracle. I shouldn't have to go into some leave. I shouldn't have to go into Workday or whatever to be able to get my time off. I should be able to not have to even leave, whether I want to chat with it or if I want a card kind of interaction or having the interface right there through whether it's Flows or Power App. But the intention here is I should actually have an improved experience over whatever I'm getting in Oracle or Workday or ServiceNow and so on.
Sorry, I think what the assertion is that I'm hearing you make is that it's a very different information architecture.
Yes. But and the answer may be if this SharePoint page, the communication site, is the best way to consume this information, we can make that UI look good inside of Teams. And it's only getting better.
Going back to your vacation analogy, I can also envision things like having some business intelligence on the back end that could say, well, these are the days that you can take off because there's a departmental policy that says that not more than 3 people in the department can have days off.
Yeah.
But all that can get built in.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, you can imagine just like Disneyland has the days that are already black or whatever, the blacked out dates. Hey, your colleagues have already requested these dates. We prefer for you to choose some of the ones in yellow. Or, but yeah, unless you have a GM approval or something. And you can plan that right into it, absolutely. So what we've got right here, how many people have already seen the Microsoft Mechanics Teams 2020 session? Okay, so I've got 2 clips. out of the Microsoft Mechanics from Ignite session that was on Teams related to their 2020 announcements. And feel free to grab another donut. And audio.
I don't think your audio is.
Okay, I'm going to talk to it.
You've seen it that many times.
I have seen it that many times. First, in fact, I'm going to stop it and we're going to start it over again. But okay. So on the left rail, you can see we've got the new Yammer. We've got our activities and teams, our calendar, which is going to be synced with Outlook, our calls, which is a fully baked call, soft phone calling. There's a few different chat things we're going to talk about that are related to things we're going to announce here. You can pin conversations. So basically, if you're chatting with somebody, pin the conversation so it stays at the top. We also have today, basically, you can't pop out windows. So now your ability to pop out the chat windows is definitely a crowd pleaser. On our teams as well, like you got a bunch of these different channels, but there's certain channels you want to focus on. You can actually pin specific channels as well. And once you start pinning channels, they actually kind of collapse, make it easier to consume them as well. Our ability to actually target groups within a team. So basically, you can look at the membership and we're going to look at managing the team. You can actually see, here's all these individuals, but you can see we have tags for people who are in logistics, the sales reps, and so on. So when we actually do an @mention, we can actually @mention the related sections of a team, or those who've been tagged with biggest tags. So like when you're posting something, you can @mention and essentially, and our ability to post it to multiple channels. So being able to, here's the different channels, even across. You can see multiple teams, so you can basically post it to different channels in different teams as well. There's a new announcement. So this basically, you want to be able to kind of announce something. They got some rich UI where you can actually add colors or a photo to kind of make it much more catchy, much more like an announcement as well. And you can even see here that drop down, everyone can reply. So you can decide, hey, this is an announcement. We actually don't want people to reply to this announcement. You can actually turn that off as well, which is kind of cool. So that's the first one. I think that the second one you'll like as well. I think it helps realize that vision a little bit more. So private channels did launch at Ignite. Basically, it has to be turned on in your tenant, but essentially you'll get a little lock when you choose private. So basically, when you're creating a channel, you can choose whether it's private or standard. Standard meaning like the default, like what we do today. The private channels are basically, from a SharePoint perspective, it's going to freak out SharePoint people because essentially there is a site collection related to that channel where it is security locked down to that group of people. And it's also hidden from a SharePoint perspective. So you have to use PowerShell if you ever need to deal with it in one way or another. but from a security perspective, now we actually have that ability to be able to say, have a small group of people who maybe it's NDA related or whatever. Then we've got basically the new rich SharePoint UI coming into Teams. We even have the sync button. So that's going to be huge and very, very needed. But basically our ability to sort and filter right in the Teams UI. The links, you just get these really, really long links whenever you paste. In fact, I'm sure that's the case now. But it basically giving us a nice little icon, very much easier to consume link here. And right on the fly, you can actually change the permissions of the file that you're sharing.
And those permissions get applied to SharePoint then?
Yeah, they're applied to the document at its storage location. So the team SharePoint.
So I also want to focus on this UI for a second, because I think this really brings it full circle. We talked so much about what the teams are, and I think that middle space of what a team is as it relates to kind of a site collection. Those of you who are SharePoint folks, you haven't really seen much of a my space on Teams yet. Look at this tasks thing. So basically, here we are looking at tasks, and inside of tasks, you can see there's a whole entire section that's personal. You can filter by important or planned or assigned to you. There's your various teams. So across all those teams and anything that's being pulled in from Planner, Outlook, To Do, all these things basically pull right into this interface. So it becomes a real productivity hub for even your ability to manage what you're doing across all these other teams. So when we talk about information architecture, getting the teams right of what a team should be so that we're not on dozens and dozens of teams, but when you are on lots of teams, you can use those pinning activities to basically focus on the things that matter to you. And then you get this nice focused roll up of requests and at mentions and things that are actually targeted at you. Even inside of activity, if you're feeling like I'm getting way too much of my activity stream, there's ways to actually configure that so that it's not so noisy. You can decide what things hit you versus what kind of notifications you get as well. So you can manage that. Any questions about this kind of personal productivity hub that is the thing called tasks? Not that I can talk about it anyway.
The tasks that are listed here, am I correct to understand this is the same repository and exchange where the To-Do app is pulling up the tasks from, right? It's just another UI on that.
It's another UI. It's a roll up.
So from an analogy standpoint, the way that the Files tab is a UI on top of SharePoint, the Task tab is a UI on top of your Exchange tab.
And more. Basically, we're talking about pulling in everything out of what you would see in Outlook tasks, but also To-Do, Planner, Project. This is basically this huge productivity area where you're getting the things that mean the most to you rolled up and focused, and your ability to filter and sort and
So
deal with
that
those
column
things.
that says bucket, that shows where those tasks are
Yeah.
coming from.
So is a source, I guess.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, you can see the top 3 ones say To Do right on them. And they may be tasks that are in a SharePoint site or in the team.
So also from after demo.
Why not? Not by default, but why, your ability to add webhooks and pull data in. I can't talk to APIs in terms of what's released. None of it's been released, so it's all speculation in terms of the Azure side and what you can do. But extensibility is a goal of this team, absolutely. Boards, I love this UI. Let me just pause here for a second so you can kind of consume this. here we are looking at the boards. Here's our to-do things, our messaging and brand teams, and the various documents that they're pulling in from there, our launch event data that's being pulled in. You can see even right across the top, group by bucket, filter, list, boards, charts, and schedule. So very focused place where we can figure out what's going on across our different teams from a task perspective, a project perspective, and the various kind of activities that relate to us and assigned,
It'd be nice.
planned and assigned to us.
It'd be nice if you could have different views and actually be able to save those views.
Absolutely. You can even see here, add new bucket is a button there right underneath where the mouse is. So your ability to, at least from a UI perspective, of adding something you care about and then controlling the rules on that thing. We're speculating here. Charts. Schedule. So I think this is huge too. When you start talking about schedule, if you look at the far right, you can see we can right from here, we can add tasks. We can view our to-dos and our various sites and see what we've completed. So we're basically rolling up again stuff from our plans, from Planner, all these different, anything calendar or date related, being able to see it on a calendar view.
So, quick question, because I was doing a demo on this for lunch and learn. We're still in proof of concept, and shifts popped up. Never seen shifts, and here I go to do the demo, and I got this thing, and everybody's, what's that? I don't know. It's new today. So it shifts because I don't see it on yours. Is that part of schedule? Is that going away? Is it?
It's definitely not going away.
Yeah,
Go for
I
it.
can speak to it real quick. So we used to have a standalone Microsoft 365 product that's called Staff Hub. And what we've done is we've swept that functionality into Teams. So now it appears in Teams as an app.
And it's basically scheduling.
That's it, yeah.
So will it be under schedule or?
No, I think this schedule view is, think of this as targeted towards the individual.
Project related.
What are my tasks that I have to do today, right? Or I want to schedule them out to the future. Staff Hub is more like in a retail scenario where you're a store manager. You got to figure out who's working on which days.
So it's for hourly workers.
For hour, yes, for scheduling,
Or if you maybe
work
you're
shifts
construction,
for hourly.
you got a bunch of carpenters out there.
Okay, so that'll still be on the left-hand side under the bread.
Yeah, it'll remain a separate app.
Got it. Thanks.
Speculation.
Could be.
Yeah. Tell them what you want. That's what I would say. So next up, we're going to be talking about Teams to email and email to Teams. One of the things I think a lot of people have been kind of questioning or wondering about is, well, what about email? Is email going away? Are we putting everything into Teams? No. Email is still a good way to kind of blast things out there and make people aware of things where a lot of people still live. So you have an email and you actually want to take that email and share it to your team. Today that's kind of a challenging thing, but now we can actually post the email and actually share it, including the attachment. So like if you have an email, you want to share it, any attachments pull right through as well.
And it's a different experience than forwarding email.
Correct.
Joel, do you ever see?
And vice versa. Here they're sharing to sharing to email from Teams.
Do you ever see Outlook and Teams version? Somehow.
Somebody's gonna say, okay, boomer, and it's gonna, the next day, it's gonna be.
Right. I could tell you what my vision of email is, and it looks a lot more like channels. I want my email organized. Today, inbox is chaos.
It's just such a seismic
Communicated
shift that
strategy, I've not heard one.
No.
To
Obviously, we're
answer
talking
that question.
way out. Yeah, there's no.
But isn't there some third
But if you're
party
asking,
that made
what
a,
does Joel think will happen?
get your email and
Actually, the third-party app that's out there that I'm aware of does integrate Outlook in Teams, but it's a way to take client-related email and store it in Teams, so it's no longer in your inbox and in an appropriate silo within the Teams environment.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
taking out of the whole universe of email scenarios.
Right.
That's
One
targeting just like the shared mailbox scenario.
Yep.
Right, where
Yeah.
a lot of organizations set up a shared mailbox for a team who interact with customers, and they send and receive all the customer emails through that shared mailbox so that anyone on the team can pick up the response for the next thing in the inbox.
Personally, I'm spending less and less and less time in email. And I think people that I communicate, collaborate with a lot, they know from a business perspective, they need to be hitting me up in Teams. Yes, they can send an email if I need to get the information, especially people from the outside world. But I now regularly am probably looking at my email maybe 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah, so one thing that I'll say about email is like one analogy that I make is go back 30 years ago, right? You had U.S. Post Office and you had interoffice mail, right? And we got to a point where email was serving both use cases. What I'm seeing is interoffice mail scenario is going to Teams. The only thing you keep using email for is the U.S. Post Office scenario where it's external collaboration with somebody who's not using Teams.
Yeah.
Or somebody sending you junk mail.
Yeah. In other words,
So
email
most
is
of it is
something
junk,
that
right.
you can more and more ignore.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So the last thing we're going to see here is basically some of the new things related to the actual video conferencing related features. Let me pause it right there. So the first thing we're seeing here, obviously a lot of you have already seen the background effects, the blurring kind of feature, where you can be anywhere, be on the beach or be in a conference room, even though you're sitting in the airport. The other thing right underneath it is these live captions. When you start talking about from an accessibility perspective, that's huge. The ability for people who may not be English speakers as a first language, their ability to see it as they're hearing you say it is massive from an accessibility perspective. But as well, their ability to then switch it to another language and see it in their native language, and whether they want to, turn off the audio and just read it, it's really, really powerful from a flattening the world kind of perspective. And as a traveler, this means a ton in terms of our ability to collaborate. And even some demos I've seen as well recently about future features are this ability. You're chatting with people in various languages. They're writing it in their first language, and your ability to just right-click, translate, and be able to see it. I mean, it's super powerful. Obviously, we've seen that kind of thing in Facebook. Now we're actually seeing that in the business. I just think that's extremely powerful from a project perspective. Now you can have people who aren't even native to the team be able to participate. Super powerful from a productivity perspective. So they actually don't end up turning that feature on because of the background noise in the video, and that's the end of this one. One other thing while I'm out of here that I want to show off a little bit.
technical standpoint too. If you have a really crappy connection and you can't hear the audio, having that transcribe and just turn the sound up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to show off. You guys know Jamie Laporte? She's awesome. The infographic she built recently that I think is actually helping email addicts appeal to teams. So this infographic that she put together, if you haven't seen this, highly recommend it. So when you compare side by side, and obviously this is why Teams over email. Email forces you to separate your inbound communication. We already talked about that. That it all kind of goes into one big bucket, and it's chaos. Email requires you to configure complex rules to ensure information is surfaced and noise is reduced. On the team side, it automatically sorts the inbound communication into channels. And obviously you're choosing that as well. Email notifies you of all new messages. With Teams, you're basically just looking at the ones you care about explicitly. You know, you're looking at your activity feed, or you're quickly scrolling through and seeing what matters. With email, every message just goes into the mailbox recipient. With the Teams, it's any @ mention, basically allowing you to poke recipients when relevant. So if there's no action required, they're not mentioning you. You know, you basically decide what you're going to consume and how you consume it. Really cool. I think that's a great visual for being able to kind of help the business understand why Teams. I do think that people who think, oh, well, it's going to reduce our email, don't have any metrics. Success is not, hey, we reduced our email. Email is going to continue to increase. There's more spammers out there. There's going to be more and more junk. Microsoft definitely was looking to see if it would reduce their email, and it did in some cases. But we're talking 2 and 3%. Like it's not a huge number, and it's not something I think that you should be focused on. Training behavior, helping people be more productive with their communication, I think is and that having people provide their feedback on the health of the service, on the success of the service, call quality, conference room quality, and for those of you who were kind of wondering what was going on earlier, that's not necessarily Teams. A lot of it's the setup of this room, and those of us who aren't familiar with this particular system. And one of the things that's interesting is actually Microsoft has actually added a health service, so you could actually see here's our conference rooms, and here's people who are in the room who report this one as, you know, like my experience today. Yeah, that was a yes. Larry and I agree. Like this was the worst experience I've had with the room ever, related to Teams. And I know that's embarrassing, but I want to just kind of say from like a health perspective, don't let that reflect on the system, because that's not typical. But our ability to kind of see health holistically and be able to kind of see here's where conference rooms are and having these nice call quality dashboards and health dashboards, those are things that are actually available right out of the, you know, those dashboards are available, so you can actually see. The call quality today would have been really rough. I think it would have been in the red. You know, it was not good. So I mentioned that a Teams deployment is quite different than any other kind of deployment, and the reason why you can't just stop in the red here. When you're rolling out Teams, sure, you're going to have those early adopters and those who are kind of excited about the technology. You may be able to move the needle even a little bit further because the technology is actually quite good. But your ability to get over this hump and to get back past the 50% is going to take some non-IT skills. It's going to take some soft skills. These adoption change management type skills. Now, what's interesting is that the UC team? Not typically. Is that the SharePoint team? Maybe. You know, do you have, maybe it's partnering with company name university, you know, the organizational university team, meaning internal learning, training, but it's as well, it's not just training. So what's atypical here is it actually doesn't take a lot to get up to speed to be able to use the tool. And I think that where you can find productivity, it doesn't take a lot. Like, you really can do these brown bags to basically get the tool out and into the hands of the users. But their ability to start adding tabs and making really, really powerful teams, some of that, you know, is how to build a successful team. Let's have sessions on that where people can opt in. Let's train the champions up, build a champion program where they can know how to build a really good team and have an experience of being on a powerful, successful team. There's even the psychology of a team and how it goes through the storming, norming, performing. Forget what's the stage.
It's forming,
norming,
storming.
Yes.
Forming.
Yes. So basically, it starts out and it goes down and then back up. So you want to get a performing team, and being able to build that around Microsoft Teams, or being able to leverage the software to actually have a more successful team as well.
Can I ask a question related to that? Because I think our mindset often is on a stable, we're kind of used to the Windows 7, the Windows 10. We're used to those stable products that come out, and then you've got the adoption process, and then you've got the next one, so that, that bell curve kind of meets that. What I'm thinking now is, as we get this every Tuesday change, or every month a new widget, and now that one's blue, not green, and where is it now? That our early adopters are the ones that are struggling to just maintain the day-to-day, and our early majority are the people that are like, you know what, I want to become late majority or laggard unless I'm forced to.
Right.
How do we kind of talk to those people?
So I've looked at it a couple of different ways. One is, if I'm going from Skype to Teams, there's one way of approaching that, where my early adopters, I get them into Teams and we start collaborating very, very early. And essentially their world should be kind of a Teams only kind of world, where they're kicking the tires, they're learning how it works, they're helping IT be able to ensure that the quality is there from a bandwidth perspective, from a quaz perspective, network perspective, and so on, that you're getting all those things worked out. You're using calling plans, but all those things are worked out with the early adopters. Once you got it to the dial tone level where, hey, this is successful, and a lot of this is you do need to kind of pick teams. It's not, there's individual users, but ultimately it needs to kind of be rolled out by teams. So being able to pick a department that's going to use the tool and then roll it out department by department so that you can do more hand holding. But that mixed mode, you want to actually reduce mixed mode where you've got the Skype users and the Teams users and everybody's kind of using whatever tool they want. There's a lot of chaos and churn in that environment. You're going to want to get through that part quickly as you can. Even those Skype users, being able to get them to use Teams for collaboration, that's really powerful experience. And from a calling perspective, working with them to kind of work out those kinks, and for calendars and meetings and conference rooms, there's things you want to make sure that you're addressing as you move along. A greenfield Teams deployment, I think that that's really, it's not that it's ideal or not ideal. I think I've been kind of coining this term Teams first approach to Office 365 or Microsoft 365, where from a learning perspective or training perspective, let's train everything in the perspective of teams. All the rest of Office 365, let's train it from the perspective of Teams is the UI, Teams is the first experience here. Now let's talk about OneDrive in that context. Now let's talk about SharePoint in that context. Let's talk about Planner and tasks and everything from a context of Teams, where Teams is the experience and kind of that unifier. So I think people get quickly overwhelmed. But if you kind of turn it the other way and say, here's 15 applications you can use, or here's an interface, and those 15 applications will come up when you need to use them. And your project manager may introduce different things as time goes on, so that the users don't have to worry about all these different parts and pieces. And from an adoption perspective, I think the best way to do this is through working with managers and working with these champions, and basically bite-sized chunks and videos, getting the various executives on board, where you've got really good dashboards where you can see how a department's doing, and being able to give them the feedback of how they're doing, so that they're actually incentivized to be able to get their whole department using it. And I think there's a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit, which is, what are those applications that a department is using? How do we integrate those into a departmental team? How about a template? Here's a team that's an HR team. What are the tools they would use? Now any other HR team, let's just clone a team and create a team based on this other team. So we're taking our best practices and essentially duplicating or replicating success. Few strategies.
If I can add to that, the champion's role is just critical with this, because one of the issues with technology is, okay, there's all these great things that can be done, but how do I use it to make a difference in what I'm doing? Okay? Within a department, a champion is going to be able to find practical usage scenarios that apply to what that department needs happen to be. And then they're going to be able to better communicate that into the other department members that may have a little more inertia. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I was having the same thought. I think the heart of your question was, the late majority people are people who are change averse. Yeah. And if you start with that understanding, I think we could all agree that's true. To Ed's point, is the way you help those people is make sure that they're in close proximity to a local champion. Somebody who understands what their day-to-day work is and who can speak to them in their own terms.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's why when you talk about change averse, your change averse is that late majority,
Yeah.
but because it's a constant change, we've increased the size of our change averse late majority population.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like the idea that you have to create a real strong body of those champions.
Building communities.
And part of it really has to do with a change in mindset that, it is so weird to think, as long as I've been in technology, I was in junior high when I first started selling programs I was writing. And there's so many people that are involved with technology that are change averse. And yet the whole industry is nothing but change. So it's really kind of a weird dichotomy there. But one of the things that I really kind of try to point out is that if you've got a new tool that can make your life better, don't try to force it to work like the old tool. Learn how to use, because that'll just make your life painful. Okay? And that's where a lot of the change adversity, I think, comes from, is they see that change as causing pain. And if you can get a champion to start saying, see how much easier this task becomes, and that can really start to move.
Absolutely. And I think that's a lot of it is being able to see, oh, this would help us out in this way or that way. Like, they need to be able to see it, because it's absolutely true. People will use the tool that they prefer. And so it creates chaos if you've got people essentially within teams kind of fighting. So essentially it's winning over the hearts and minds. Back in the early days of Yammer, they kind of had the green dots and the red dots and the yellow dots. Of like, the green dots are the people who are willing to kind of, they're willing to check it out and see, and they'll give you, you know, they're the adopters. They're kind of excited about what's happening here. They're okay with change. The yellow people, you know, these yellow dots, they're not sure, but they're willing to kind of hear it out. And then you've got this crowd that are just like entrenched. And so essentially your goal is not to focus on the red dots. You need to first start with the green. And then once you've got some real wins and case studies and demos, things you can show that really show time savings or slick ways that automation and ways that people can save a lot of time, like a lot of these accessibility features, and hey, wouldn't it be great, XYZ, let me show you some of these things. And being able to have the champions actually tell your stories, you know. And those red dots, it's the more you get, you know, over, and the more they say, they see others using it, and they're the oddball out from everybody on the team's using it except for me, they'll do your work to kind of help convince that person, kind of whittle them down. And basically your adoption metrics, you can see those people who just aren't using it. But if you start looking at the other tools they're using, they may just be super old school and they're not doing chat anywhere, you know. So your ability to kind of bring them into the chat world may be a much, much harder job than, you know, hey, let's make sure those chats aren't on some other tool, you know. Anyway. So, and this is how IT really has changed as well. Like IT, very good at deployment. Man, we can get stuff out there. We're really good at infrastructure. Even in the cloud now, we'll get our hybrid and get the MFA set up and make sure that it's a solid dial tone experience. Activation, we got that figured out. You know, we can get it. Now this is where it starts to get difficult. This is not a typical IT skill. Awareness, right? This is a communications team. This is your corporate communications, or maybe it's a marketing team. It's some team that's like, maybe it's an IT, PMO or something that's focused on a project around awareness. But how do we move from people are aware of the tool and they know they can use it to people are using it on a regular basis and are finding success in it? And ultimately where we're trying to get here is this proficiency, people being able to changing their behaviors, integrating it in, taking advantage of it, finding the productivity gains that were promised from the beginning. And if you're just turning the lights on, there's going to be pockets that are going to find things, and it's going to be just, you just added another one into the chaos that already is. So that's where this platform is so important from that perspective of, we've done this for SharePoint, we've done this for Exchange, but now that it's all in the cloud and people really do have the choice, are they going to send that information in an email? They're going to send that as a chat or a message. The users decide how they're going to communicate and share that information. I think I should probably start wrapping it up. I want to show you just a couple of things, and you guys can have these slides. I'll be posting them to slideshare.net/Joel Oleson. I'll also tweet it. So if you follow me on Twitter, it's Joel Oleson. But this is a Microsoft IT tracking adoption. Like, I love the detail in this because this kind of tells you just how important the program and trying to understand the move at Microsoft from Skype to Teams. So the first thing they were on this left-hand rail, you can kind of see, first off, they're looking at active users and chat usage and meeting usage and call usage. So essentially, very much a UC perspective in this particular chart because they were focused on getting from Skype to Teams. So this doesn't necessarily reflect how many tabs are they using, how many connectors have they added, what are the applications they've added. That's totally extra on top of this program to get people off of Skype. But when you start saying this first set of columns, or this first section here is these are people that went to the Art of Teamwork training. And essentially, you can see how quickly, after they attended the training, they are now successfully chatting on Teams. They're actually using it for meetings and their calls. Within a fairly short period of time, most calls are now on Teams. The meetings are still mixed because guess what? Other people are probably running those meetings, but you can see the Teams meetings definitely have grown. And chat as well, within a very short period of time, Teams has taken over as the place for preferred chat. Now you look at calls when you're talking about managers who have been reached, right? Same direct manager as the reached users. So you can see the impact of those who had been trained impact on their manager. So basically, they reached the champion and the champion convinced the manager. As you can see, the manager's consumption or usage of it versus the champion. So you can see those champions had a lot of impact on the managers. And then when you start looking at it holistically throughout the organization, other users who are members of those teams, hey, it's working. And then you look at the champions program here, basically being able to kind of spin that up and seeing the percentage of meetings and calls and so on. So very interesting way of kind of capturing that. I've got another adoption kind of chart here. This is one that Tygraph built for Teams. So you can kind of see the chats and the private messages and the calls and meetings. So the calls, it looks like they probably don't even have call plans, so they maybe just barely turned it on. But you can see over time, the chat messages and the private messages have just kind of taken off over time. But here's your top users. You can go, hey, let's go figure out who our top users are. Let's go have some conversations with those people. What are they connecting with? Definitely they're connecting with their Windows devices, but there's still a lot of folks who are using their iPhones and Android devices and so on. One of the things they wanted to add on top of this was this working out loud score. One of the things that Caruana was really big into as well is this idea of, are we actually fulfilling that vision of people sharing and working out loud? Like, let's talk about what's happening. So they actually created some scoring to be able to talk through the messaging. And the intention here is that we could look at this by department. We can actually have a little dashboard of looking at one department versus another department, seeing which of the areas we're reaching, especially from a training perspective or a champion perspective, where are the areas we need to focus as we're rolling this out. And I want to, there's one particular slide. So I talked about as an app platform, and I kind of want to end on this idea of app platform. So there's getting it rolled out and used as a UC perspective, but then there's actually building solutions in it. And you could do a whole session just on this, but for many sessions, full day, 3-day workshop even. Tabs, bots, connectors, cards. Don't just think of there being one way to interact with Teams. There's a ton of different ways that you can actually take this platform and build solutions with it so that it actually is adding richer functionality. And don't think the Teams team is not yet ready for you. Look at all the different ways as a developer you can actually get started working with this stuff. There's the Teams App Studio. There's these app templates that I've referred to that I haven't necessarily showed you yet. But there's a really good, my favorite one's the HR one. Really cool, shows this scenario that Michael was talking about in terms of leave requests and how the system interacts with you. There's a JavaScript SDK for tabs. So if you're trying to create a really nice looking user interface, got the webhooks. So being able to connect to various APIs and pulling data in. Node.js for bots with SDK, the .NET bot framework, and even the Yeoman generator for Teams. So really rich kind of experience starting to work with with all this, not to mention even the SharePoint framework, which I don't know how much longer that's going to be the name, but your ability to build stuff in SharePoint framework and essentially deploy it to Teams and SharePoint, and beyond, who knows. I wanted to show you this HR one. Check this out. So here we've got an application built on Teams. In fact, you can kind of see at the top, we've got the Teams. Teams is really the interface where the users are interacting. But if we look at where that's coming, there's a bot that's integrated, and there's some telemetry. There's an HR support service app, which is connected to the Q&A maker service, which as well, from a ticket perspective, connects to an Azure storage table. And there's some application insights. And so you can kind of see here from a what is this thing? There's the FAQ, which is connected up to their cognitive service. So people can ask questions. Basically, imagine you had this big repository of everything that HR support knows. So HR support basically puts it into Q&A maker, and now the bot's trained on all that stuff. Now you've got the support bot that knows everything, but it also is serving the end users and the subject matter experts. It's allowing them to scale. So when somebody asks a question, the bot tries to answer it first, and if it can't, then it asks, would you like to talk to a human? Would you like to talk to somebody in HR? And they can say yes, and it pops up and says, they'll be available in 12 minutes. And then, do you still want to do this? But that level of comfort of letting people know, hey, it's going to take a while, or here's the SLA, and here's how to, but having that in front with the knowledge base and the intention that the more questions that people ask, the more you're going to know how to beef up your repository as well. Hey, let's go have someone create content based on these questions or the top questions that are being asked. You've got the support tab, which are showing recommended links in the form of tiles. Users can click on these things and opens in a browser. You got your configured application, which is this Azure App Service, where they can get this welcome knowledge base. There's a grid that has these support tiles. And Christina Wheeler actually did at Ignite, did a whole entire session just on the app templates. It's the BRK 3160. Here's what the interface looks like. Here we are in Teams. So this is the scenario Michael was talking about. And here, the Contoso bot is basically saying, Karen, you have a pending time off request. And in fact, here she is in the app on the right. She requests time off, adds a request, and you can see her duration. She has a start date and end date. The manager gets it in Teams and they approve it. Here's show me my time off, and here's this, or she says vacation balance, and boom, here's her PTO or vacation and sick leave. It's available. And then after, she expands the vacation so she can see the probation and planned and pending. And here's what it looks like on the back end, that HR side of it, where they can see tickets. Here's the active ticket, the resolved tickets. And here's creating a ticket, laptop request. Interacting through the Teams UI. In fact, this is the one where it's like, hey, I'm creating a new ticket. My laptop screen flickers when it comes back from sleep. And she requests that. And here she's saying, you know what? I actually want to chat with an agent. She clicks the chat with agent button. And the bot comes back and says, hey, to best assist you, we need to know what the model of your laptop and OS is. And that's all automated. But then, is there anything else? Hey, you're being connected with the next agent. It's in 12 minutes. Would you rather schedule time with somebody or do you want to wait? Which is kind of cool. And this is now the back end HR using essentially what may be connected to some back end system. Now they've got this UI where they're managing their tickets right in the Teams UI, the tickets assigned me UI. And last but not least, a nice little dashboard, Power BI dashboard that basically rolls up the data. Here's our chats and calls. Here's our mean time to repair, our top reporting issues, what our issues are, how long our tickets are over time, and so on. And talking about these app templates, there's the FAQ Plus, an HR support one, a list search one if you're looking for search on a list, messaging extensions with custom stickers or a company communicator, and there's some great Microsoft links, the Skype to Teams migration, shortened link, and the Teams adoption one, which is basically where Carter One has been pushing all of her adoption stuff called Success with Teams, aka.ms/Success with Teams. And those of you who are developers, definitely get familiar with the Microsoft Teams platform. There's a bunch of code samples as well as those app templates. And that's it. Yeah, thanks for sticking with me.
Hey, just curious, like best case example of companies that have adopted Teams today. You guys know of any?
You know, one of my favorites is this Australian teacher at a college. That session, it was at Inspire. I can't remember the name of the college, but it was super impressive how he's basically using his students.
Yeah, that's kind of a
Exactly.
good plug for our next upcoming session, right? We're gonna have somebody from University of Chicago talking about how they're using Teams in a educational environment. But, you know, I don't have like a list of corporate adoption statistics off the top of my head, but, you know, our penetration across our enterprise accounts is really, you know, it's doing very well. Like Joel said during the presentation, a lot of it's driven by Skype migrations. But there are a lot of places where, you know, there's no incumbent solution like Slack or whatnot, and those folks are really enjoying the benefits of it.
Have you guys seen that AvePoint just got funding $200 million for their Teams work?
Yeah. So they're going to be doing that. That 200 million is specifically targeted at onboarding and
You know
migration.
who's funded them? Is the next app pointer.
I don't know. I didn't know.
Some private equity investor.
Yeah, exactly. They should pay let's
Goldman
raise money
Sachs
on
did their
Teams.
initial ones.
But, yeah. Lots of work to be done in this space. And there are plenty of good case studies out there.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
All right.
Let's see if there's any questions online. Are there any questions online?
Hasn't been anything in the chat. All right.
So for the-
All right,
for
thanks,
those in the
everybody.
room, Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody online, and thank you, everybody in the room. And
Thanks a lot for hosting, Michael and everybody there.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.